Hey, Rob, you want to start us off and then,
I'd love to.
yeah.
Welcome back, everybody. We're going to do another Saturday morning edition of from the Washington State FOP about updates as far as legislative processes going on and the different bills that affect law enforcement. A couple quick announcements before we get started. I want to point out two things. If you have not gotten the email regarding FOP responses to OIS and critical incidents that's going to be put on by the Washington State and the Idaho State Lodge attorneys, that's a free Zoom call coming up. It's going to be 2 hours on March 10th. If you've not gotten the information, contact your lodge president. They can get you the link to register for the course, and it's free of charge. So something that every officer should probably take the opportunity to watch and share with the different people that they work with what to expect from an attorney's perspective that's looking out for law enforcement's best interests. The other announcement is if you go to YouTube and go to WAFOP TV, the Washington State FOP has created a YouTube channel. For those of you that are watching this are probably on Facebook, but if somebody comes up to you and says, hey, I'm interested, or you're telling them about these Saturday morning meetings and they say, but I don't have Facebook to watch, they will be posted on the FOP YouTube channel. And if you guys can go subscribe to that over time, we may get, I'm sure we'll get more information posted on there in addition to these legislative updates. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over. We've got our state lodge president and most of the legislative board on here this morning. And Michael Transu, our lobbyist, will be joining shortly. And we're going to talk about some upcoming bills and past bills we've talked about and where they're at and update you. So go ahead, James.
Yeah, well, thanks. Well, Michael's logging on here. So we had a busy week. I'll just start with the big one, and then we'll let Michael take it from there. 1310, which was the creates a duty of care and changes the use of force standard to a necessary standard that seems to contradict itself. That's my 2 cents. That being said, the big victory that did not make it out of committee this week. And so Michael definitely put in a lot of work, a lot of time, and a lot of effort into that bill. As you guys know, 2 years ago, we revamped the use of force standard, taking away malice, went to a reasonable officer standard. But in a very rushed fashion, they've decided to push through even a more crazy use of force standard than they tried 2 years ago with 940. That being said, it did not make it out of committee today. I want to give thanks to both sides of the aisle for realizing that bill needs a lot of work. More specifically, the chair of the Public Safety Committee, Roger Goodman, and the ranking member, Mossbrucker, from the 14th. This is my first session where we've actually worked really close with Ms. Mossbrucker, and I got to be honest with you, I really appreciate her approach and trying to work with the FOP and figure this stuff out. And so, and as always, Roger Goodman, he realizes that, we got a tough road to hoe as it is. He gave an interview this week where he mentioned that, hey, police officers have a very tough job, and we want to bring police officers in their community together. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michael, because that's who people tune in to hear. So take it away, Michael.
Boy, I don't know about that. If people are tuning in to hear me, I have to have some other conversations with people, because that's scary. Well, thank you, James. 1310, we and a couple other law enforcement groups are working really hard behind the scenes to have the most egregious section taken out, which is Section 6, and that's the section that James mentioned that changes the use of force standard from the one you all worked so hard to get done a couple of years ago to this imminent threat of bodily harm standard, which is just a non-starter for us. Having said that, you should also know that there are several law enforcement groups out there that are opposed to the whole bill. So again, you'll see us, and you know, I'm always hesitant to speak for folks, but I think us and WACOPS are on the same page as it relates to, you know, removing Section 6 and trying to work with the other remaining portions of the bill. Hey, James and Rob, I'm going to put you guys on the spot. Can we try to, and I'll help you find that interview clip with Representative Goodman and Representative Mossbrucker. I had a chance to look at it a little bit, not all of it, but it's a really good piece. And I think it will really show folks a lot of, at a really high level, kind of what's going on with police reform from both sides of the aisles' perspective. So Rob, if I can find that clip and we can find that link to TVW, is that something that we could either post on the website or link through Facebook or something like that?
Yeah. Leah already sent it to me this morning.
Yeah. Leah, great minds think alike. Perfect.
It's going on the YouTube channel too. I already took care of it this morning as well.
That's a great idea, and great minds think alike. And, you know, that's really something that I think for our members, again, really good high level perspective on where both sides of the aisle are coming from. And again, you don't have to listen to me to see where, you know, the ranking member and the chair are coming from. You can kind of see it for yourselves in that interview that Austin Jenkins did. So the last thing I'll say on 1310, about 14 amendments on the Republican side to date have been proposed and failed. As James mentioned, this did not come out of committee. There are, I think, 4, maybe 5 amendments left. And there's one that, you know, we can support, which I think has kind of slowed it down a little bit, is Representative Orwell, who has an amendment that would push out when the standard becomes applicable to law enforcement. You know, it's something that we could certainly support, but we also need to have that Section 6 gone. So I will leave 1310 at that, James, unless you want to add anything. Okay. I'm going to go on to House Bill 5259, and this is the legislation that has as its companion, it isn't noted on there, is House Bill 1092. Remember, these are the bills that we are working really hard on to keep the amount and level of data that's collected on peace officer interactions to the greatest degree possible. As we've talked about on previous calls, the more data that's out there as it relates to interactions with the public, we think is better and is better, number one, and paints a far better picture on what you all do day in and day out, not just focusing on the uses of deadly force, which, as we've talked about, constitute a very small percentage of our interactions. So 2 bills in motion, 1092 and 5259. 5259 is the bill that is sponsored by Senator Tawana Nobles, new representative in the 28th, the Lakewood area, kind of my neck of the woods. This is going to be one of her signature bills, I believe, for the session. We worked really hard on the Republican side of the aisle in committee to really have them know and understand how we felt about large collections of data and how that was good in our judgment for us and our members, and how it, you know, will paint a much better and reasoned and reasonable narrative based upon data and facts. And we think that that'll also help really counterbalance the narrative that we face every day with, you know, the family members and such on how bad we do day in and day out. And we just think that's a much better approach. That work, I think, paid off a little bit. The bill passed out of the Law and Justice Committee unanimously. Ranking Member Padden, Senators Holy, Wagoner, and McCune all voted for it. I think they really had early on some concerns about the data collection. We were successful in not having the data collection be overseen by WASPIC. As we've talked about, you know, from a policy, political standpoint, we agree that having this data housed in a non-law enforcement agency is a good thing. So right now, there's a lot of details in the bill, but basically creates an advisory group of experts to work, including academia, peace officers, and local governments, and is going to make a recommendation to the Attorney General. And that recommendation, I'll just kind of summarize it, really needs to be followed so that the Attorney General, has very little opportunity to undo that decision. We're working with Senator Padden and trying to figure out the best mechanism we can come up with that. But we're really pleased about the shape the bill's in right now, and really think that has a good pathway forward. It's in Ways and Means right now. And a lot of these bills are going to go into Ways and Means, and I'm going to just say this, get stuck. That's because we have a March revenue forecast that will come out that will adjust all of the expenditure, all the revenues that are estimated in the state. And once that revenue forecast comes out, both the Appropriation and Ways and Means Committee will get to work and figure out how much and to what extent all of the bills in that committee are going to be funded, what the funding levels are and such. So we may see a little bit of pause on a lot of these bills just because they are in the Appropriations and Ways and Means Committee waiting to be funded. So, and again, 5259, I believe, is going to be the vehicle for that because of the Tawana Nobles connection. Investigation or investigative audits. Remember, this is Senate Bill 5069 and House Bill 1089. And remember, this is the bill that puts the state auditor in the position of reviewing independent investigations at the local level. And it's really not a substantive, I shouldn't probably say it that way. It's really a procedural check. We were able to get the words in there, compliance audit, process compliance audits. And it's really just a check by the state auditor of the local process to make certain that they dotted their I's, crossed their T's, followed the process that's laid out in state statute in terms of conflicts of interest, the community board member being appointed to the investigation team, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So those bills are in good shape. I will tell you that House Bill 1089 is determined to be the vehicle at this point in time. And let me just kind of step just aside or back for just a second to talk about companion bills. So companion bills are bills both in the House and the Senate that are identical. And in this COVID session with everybody, not everybody, but the vast majority of legislators working remotely, the number of bills is significantly reduced. And the bodies have agreed to, if there are companion bills, they're going to pick a bill that's going to be the vehicle and let the other one lay off to the side just for purposes of keeping workloads down. When you've got two bills moving both ways, it drives a lot of work by staff and by fiscal people on staff. So you'll hear me saying one bill is going to be the vehicle, and just know that's the context for that statement. So tactics update, House Bill 1054 was passed out of the Public Safety Committee last couple of weeks ago. It is passed off to the Rules Committee and sits in the Rules Committee waiting to be moved to the floor action. And let me step aside again just for a second to talk about the Rules Committee. So each body has a Rules Committee, and the Rules Committee is really the gatekeeper of how and when and to what extent bills make it for floor action. So again, just really simple. It's a big committee. The majority party runs the committee, the speaker and the majority leader in the Senate. Senate's a little bit quirky because the lieutenant governor is the chair of the Rules Committee in the Senate. So, but just know when I say, things are kind of parked in rules, it doesn't mean that in a bad way. It just means that's where the gatekeepers are and they get to decide what gets moved to the floor. So the Tactics Bill 1054, as I mentioned, is in rules. We're working with the prime sponsors and behind the scenes on the two major issues I think that are left in that bill, which is addressing the K-9 section and then addressing the section on tear gas or C2.
Hey, Michael, real quick. You talked about that interview between the public safety chair and the ranking member. He also talks about the tactics bill, the public safety chair, and talks about the things that are concerning to our members. Like he makes the distinction, and stop me if you've heard this before, between armed vehicles and armored vehicles. He almost quotes Michael verbatim. But that being said, it looks like we're going to get to keep armored vehicles. We just can't run around with a 50 cal on top of a police car and have an armed vehicle, excuse me. Also, we have, like Michael said, we're working behind the scenes. We have a stakeholder meeting with both sides of the aisle, and on Monday at 5:30 to talk about the canine. For those of you that are listening, that are going to listen, please reach out via email if you want concerns expressed. I'm going to bring Dills to that meeting, because he has some canine experience, and I do not want one canine person to be the only voice in the room, who seems to be a very loud voice. So sorry, Michael.
No. And I don't have the hand feature or know anything on that. You guys pop in when you want to, and that's great. I appreciate the context and the dialogue. So tactics, working behind the scenes, talked about all of that. Qualified immunity or civil cause of action, House Bill 1202. It does not have a Senate companion. And that's the bill that, remember, is sponsored by Representative Ty. It was moved out of public safety yesterday, in pretty good shape from our standpoint. Not all law enforcement groups agree with that perspective, but remember, the bill as it stands right now allows a peace officer a total defense from injury if that officer followed policy, training of the agency, and also importantly, if they acted at the direction of their supervisors. So we feel like the bill, and that bill also holds the employer independently liable if they are at fault in terms of the training or the direction. So, it's not the best of all worlds, but we do think that it's in better shape than a lot of qualified immunity bills around the country, which do a lot of crazy things like limit somebody's exposure and then limit the amount that an employer can pay on their behalf, thereby exposing their personal assets to being able to be got. So,
hey, Michael, just for the benefit of the people listening, there's a lot of talk about removing, or that Congress should take qualified immunity away from police officers all over this country, and enacting a law that would do that. You have all the major sports athlete unions sent a letter last week or this week asking Congress act. And then there's a good article in Politico that talks about a push at the national level to remove qualified immunity from law enforcement. So having this and having the carve out may be, at the end of the day, a good thing for our members if something was to happen on a national level.
And what I would like to say too is, we do have to recognize Representative Ty for actually listening to our concerns and trying to address some of those things. So, we do appreciate her taking that time, and when she didn't have to, but she did. And so we do recognize that she has been willing to work with us on trying to make something that's more palatable for our profession.
Yeah, that's for sure, Marco. We've talked about, Rob Pride, who helped on that original call with her, and she took a lot of that stuff to heart, and that's, really to be the case. I think I've got just two minor amendments I want to run by her again, allowing officers to recover attorney's fees if they're the prevailing party in an action. So I'm going to continue to push that and have the Republicans offer those sorts of amendments on the floor when it gets there. Anything else on 1202? Right on. So House Bill 1203, Community Oversight Boards. That was a bill that passed out of the Public Safety Committee on Thursday. Interestingly, in that bill, there were 3 amendments. There were, I think, about 10 amendments, James, give or take, on the Republican side that were proposed on the community oversight boards. 3 of them were taken, and we're going to continue to push one as it moves through the process. But Representative Young on the Republican side had 3 amendments adopted, which we support. One regarding civil immunity from liability of folks from actions of the Community Oversight Board. There was a requirement that community oversight boards be properly trained by their local governments, and that's something that we can certainly support. And then the original bill had the community oversight boards basically making the decision as to whether or not to hire a police chief or a sheriff. And as you can probably well guess, that's something that local governments didn't take too kindly to. And of course, they argue, that there is, community oversight in the hiring of police chiefs and sheriffs, because that's something that, number one, in the sheriff's standpoint, voters approve. And number two, in the local police chief realm, that's something that city councils do. So instead of having them sort of the hiring and firing authority, it basically, the amendment that was adopted was to put somebody from the community oversight board on the hiring panel, if you will, that the local government puts forth on the police chief side. So that's something that we can support for sure. We continue to have concerns on that bill as it relates to the independent investigatory and subpoena powers that those community oversight boards have. I haven't had a chance to go through the substitute with the fine-tooth comb. I don't think those amendments were adopted, James. So it's something that we're going to continue to push. And I think law enforcement is unanimous in this, that, we're okay with the community oversight boards having input into policies, procedures, those sorts of things. But giving them direct investigatory powers with regard to subpoena powers and investigation powers is something that we think is just a bridge too far. So something we're going to continue to try to get the bill amended.
Yeah, they took 5 amendments, 3 from Young, 2, 1 from Clippert, and 1 from Jenny Graham, Representative Graham. And so there, you could definitely tell there was some bipartisan work there. On the they removed the subpoena or not subpoena power, but the outside counsel. They also, one of the amendments that Representative Young got across was when they could look at a complaint investigation by the agency, and so that one was accepted. I want to reach out. Representative Young has been a champion so far, and he's communicated with Michael and I appreciate getting to know Representative Young. And I really, when it comes time for legislative year, we got to keep in mind we have some new people that are really stepping up and fighting for the cause as far as our profession goes. And he's one of them, and I really appreciate how he is handling himself on this committee, trying to work across the aisle and trying to get good policy made.
Totally agree. It's so easy just to, fight and complain about everything, but it's really, refreshing is probably not the right word, but it's really cool when, somebody from the other side of the aisle comes up and develops some really good, common sense amendments that, are taken by the other side. So agree with James absolutely on Representative Young. Anything else on community oversight boards? All right, I'm going to move on to House Bill 1267, and that is the Office of Independent Investigations. That also passed out of the Public Safety Committee on Thursday. There were also several amendments that were adopted to 1267. Remember, this is the bill that creates a statewide Office of Independent Investigations. It sets forth criteria and instances as to when the state level independent oversight board / team takes over a local investigation. Several what I would call kind of minor amendments were adopted. And I think that it's something that we're going to have to continue to look at and see where we settle on the proposed substitute as it passed out of committee day before yesterday. And I got to see how those 4 amendments that were adopted kind of weave in to that proposal, James, and then we'll see how we go. That bill is not, I expect that bill to go to Ways and Means. It has not been put there yet. And I'll step aside just for a second again to talk about the process. So when bills pass out of committee and there's a question as to whether or not they have a fiscal impact, they kind of go into this holding pattern. So the majority party is kind of sitting there, kind of deciding, do we just send this to rules or does it have a fiscal impact? What's the fiscal impact and such? So both 1203 and 1267 are in this kind of hovering pattern. The party hasn't decided if they're going to Ways and Means or to the Rules Committee. I expect both of them to go to Ways and Means, but just want to let you all know, if you get online or to look at a bill and look at where it is in the process, and said, Trance, you said it passed out of committee, but it's not anywhere else. Just know that there's this kind of holding place where bills can sit for a day or two until the leaders decide to which committee it's going to be referred. All right, House Senate Bill 5. Oh, any other thing, James, Marco, you want to add on 1267? Oh, I got one thing to add on 1267. Sorry about that. I will note that Representative Entenman has introduced her independent prosecutor bill, and I forget the number. But remember, this is a bill that creates a statewide independent prosecutor in the office of the Attorney General. 2 things on that bill as introduced. We're going to suggest that the local prosecutor not have any, and I'll just use my word, use any wiggle room to decide on a local level whether or not there's a conflict of interest and whether or not there is an ability to move it off to a neighboring county prosecutor. I believe those are 2 provisions in the bill now as introduced. And remember, for FOP's purposes, we want that to be an absolute conflict. We want the statewide prosecutor to look at all deadly uses of force. And that's just where we sit. We think that provides more transparency, saves local government some money on the prosecutor side. So they can save some money in terms of trying to determine whether to prosecute. The flip side of that, as you all probably know, is there is this prosecutorial discretion, independently elected. We can on our own decide whether or not there's a conflict of interest. We know and understand those arguments, but again, think the better public policy is that it needs to be at a statewide level and just needs to be an absolute conflict for a prosecutor to investigate and decide whether to charge an officer in a deadly force incident. So we're going to continue to work on that. And there may be an opportunity to put an independent prosecutor amendment into the Office of Independent Investigation bill. Remember that James sat on the governor's police reform task force, and that task force had both the independent investigation teams and the independent prosecutor as recommendations. And if the independent prosecutor bill were to be amended on to 1267, it certainly puts both of those recommendations in one place and can certainly soften our opposition, if you will, to the independent investigations bill. So just know that there's some process that still has to go on as it relates to the independent prosecution bill just adopted by Representative Entenman, and there may be some opportunities to stick that language into another bill or 2 that's already moving through the process. So with that, James, Marco, anything to add?
I'll concur with you. I think the bill, if they were to move to a totally independent process, you can't have one without the other. And I'll just give you the backside of why you have 2 different bills. Representative Entenman doesn't think she'll be able to get the independent prosecution bill through the legislature. So she didn't want it to drag down the independent investigative body. I'm telling you, this is based off a system in Canada, and the recommendations from those people were, hey, it doesn't work unless you have independent prosecution. I sat through all 10 of those meetings, and that was clear. And so if they want to go to this process and not be a big boondoggle, they need to include the independent prosecution. And so until these two get merged, we're only going to support independent prosecution. We're not going to support the independent investigation because it will be a failure. And quite frankly, if you were going to do one before the other, it should be the independent prosecution.
Fair enough.
I totally agree. I totally agree with that as well. You know, and I know some of our members, probably get a little concerned when we talk about the independent prosecutor portion. Please ask us offline. We can definitely go through the thought process in that. But it is something that we wholeheartedly support because of many instances where cases have been with the prosecutor in that jurisdiction, just for one example, for many months. And it just gives the perception, to our community that, there's rumors start to spread. We want to make sure that we get things to the proper people in an independent way, so that way they can make a proper determination, and that can be supported.
Right on. Anything else, Mr. Shrimpshire? Okay. All right. And look at us a little bit early today, but I'm going to just talk about three other things that are going on that are of interest. So House Bill 1223, which is a piece of legislation related to custodial interrogations. That was a bill that was heard. Gosh, these days are starting to run together. Sorry, everybody. I think
yesterday.
Was it yesterday or Thursday?
Yesterday.
And this is a piece of legislation that requires the videoing and audioing of custodial interrogations, whether by cell phone, body cam, and if the custodial interrogation is not recorded either by video or by audio, for a lot of different reasons, either equipment malfunction, wasn't the right place. There's some requirements in there on if it's not recorded audioly or audioly. Wow, I just came up with a new word. Either via audio or video, that there's a form that gets filled out as to why that couldn't occur. Everybody who testified on that legislation was for it, with one exception. The Washington State Association of Police Chiefs and Sheriffs were in opposition to that bill. That's something that I think, in talking with James, that we are totally supportive of. It's something that, really, I think, is going to put peace officers in a really good spot in terms of having those things recorded. And I think the majority of the time, as I talk to James and Marco, folks are going to, maybe want to change their stories, but come back to their original position after they see the video or hear the audio. We also are going to talk about seeing if that bill can get expanded to include domestic violence instances. And right now, the bill only requires for custodial of juveniles. And James, am I going to get this right? Felonies.
Yep, felonies and juveniles. And so here's the logic. Here's the logic behind that. It will finally force your departments to get off their butt and get you a body cam, because that's going to be the easiest way to comply with this law. You hit your button on your body cam, and now you're audio and video recording your interview, custodial interview. And WASPIC's argument was, hey, it's too costly. Well, I got news for you. We're in the policy committee. I'm not going to argue about cost. That's for another committee. I think it's good policy. One, it's something that every investigator does anyway. They take a recorded statement. In this day and age, the technology is there. And two, it's going to force people to get body cams, which we know support. We're doing the right thing the right way all the time.
Yep.
99.99% of the time. So that's the logic why we're signing in. It's good policy. It'll force some body cams being bought, or some recording devices being bought. Either way, it takes pressure off the officer.
Anything to add, Marco?
No, I absolutely agree. Wholeheartedly, we support this this piece of legislation for that purpose, and it's something that is definitely needed going forward.
Right on. Okay, the next bill I want to mention is House Bill 1394. This is getting back to Representative Young. This is a bill that Representative Young has asked for our help on, and it's the unlawful discharge of a laser. And so we'll get behind him. I think it's up for hearing sometime late next week. And so we'll make certain, I'll coordinate with James and Marco and see if we can't get an officer to help either one of you two to testify briefly, or somebody from our ranks to help on unlawful discharge of a laser. Last thing I want to talk about a little bit is some of the coordination that's going on behind the scenes with me and WACOPS and WASPIC specifically. So we meet once a week and just kind of put our heads together and, see where we can kind of divvy up some work, as it will, on bills that we all agree on. And the one that we all agree on, and that is, the most top priority. Gosh, I'm making up a lot of words as I'm going along here today. So top priority for us is House Bill 1310. Police use of force. And we have, between WACOPS, WASPIC, and myself, divvied up several House members and several senators to have some targeted communications and meetings with some folks that we think might be able to be on our side in terms of the use of force standard and removing Section 6. So at a high level, just so everybody knows, the Democrats are in charge of both houses. So in the Senate, that means you have to change the mind of 5 senators to undo something that the majority party wants to do. In the House, because of that strong majority, that means you have to get at 9 Democrats on the House side. I say that just so you kind of have a little bit of an impression as to what the work is to try to move some of these pieces of legislation in the right direction. It's a big hill, and I'm going to lean on you all a little bit in terms of communicating with those members that we point out that have a better than most possibility of being on our side and understanding our side of the policy and the impacts on the things that you all do day in and day out. But I wanted to mention that just so you know that behind the scenes there is some, there's some work going on that really we're trying to, kind of coordinate forces a little bit and not stepping on each other's toes and making certain that, we're making the work be a little bit more coordinated and smarter just from a broader law enforcement perspective. So I wanted to mention that to you all and just kind of, again, let you know that we're working with some of our colleagues on the handful of bills that we all absolutely unequivocally agree on. So with that, I'm going to close up my comments and testimony and see Marco and James if you want me to talk about anything else. And
hey, Michael, there's one question on Facebook, and it's back to the body cam, and I'll take it. It's, have they fixed the public disclosure issues around body cams? So to a degree, yes. A couple of years ago in the legislature, we worked on this as well. It allowed an exemption if you were starting a pilot. For every agency that started a pilot program for body cams, there are some exemptions to the public disclosure law. How they're going to fix that, and they have, is they've extended the deadline to start those pilot projects that give you those exemptions to the public disclosure law. So we have had discussions in our behind the scenes meetings, several of them, as a matter of fact, about running some kind of legislation about around body cams, and this session. But know this: I personally have body cams for all my officers. The public disclosure issue is not that big of an issue as it was originally led to believe. I'm sorry. I see what it cost me to operate that every month, and I'm not seeing a big, huge fiscal impact because of the public disclosure. There are ways to operate if you use the right camera system that really take the burden off of your records people. So that's my 2 cents with that. And I think we're ready to go around the room, right? Marco, you ready?
Yeah. So just really quick, Michael. One of the things that I know was a concern for our members last week had to do with Senate Bill 5263. Can you just give a little information on where we're at with that bill?
Hold on one second. The answer is yes.
That's the look back in time on civil liability for a use of force. The tribes were supporting.
Yeah, so that bill did pass out of the Law and Justice Committee on Thursday. It did not go. It did not go to the Ways and Means Committee. It did go to the Rules Committee. There is a substitute that was adopted that talks about the effect of which is that in actions arising out of law enforcement activities resulting in personal injury, it is a complete defense to the action that the finder of fact has determined beyond a reasonable doubt that the person injured or killed was engaged in the commission of a Class B or Class A felony. So they haven't changed that at all to our liking. So that's a piece of legislation that we're going to have to continue to work on.
Thanks, Michael. I appreciate that. I know that the legislative session continues to be very fluid, and there'll be some more things that we're going to have to address next week. I know that there is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, regarding policy bills, that there is a cutoff for policy bills. Would you just kind of explain when that is?
Yep. Make certain I get them right, and I will get to Leah a official calendar for the legislature that finally got adopted. And so we're in a long session. I'll just kind of be a little bit winded because I know folks, there's a lot of differing levels of understanding in how the ledge process works. So we are in a long session, which is a 105-day session. These are the sessions where biennial budgets, capital, operating, and transportation are all adopted, which is why they're 105 days. A short session, which is the sessions that occur in the even number years, are quite a bit shorter than that, and they're only 65 days, which I generally like quite a bit better, or 60 days, which I like quite a bit better, but on short sessions, things do move quite a bit more quickly. And so throughout any session, there are cutoff days when bills have to make it out of the policy committees. There are cutoff days when bills have to make it out of their respective budget committees. And remember, I talked about appropriation and Ways and Means. There are days when bills have to make it out of their House of Origin. The one exception to all of that is bills that are necessary to implement the budget. So if there are policy bills hanging out in a policy committee and then a budget, and they're dead in a policy committee and a budget references them, those bills automatically come back alive. So the first cutoff in this long session is the originating House Policy Committee, and that cutoff date is February 15th. So coming up here in about a little over a week. The next cutoff is the House of Origin Fiscal Committee, and that cutoff date is February 22nd. And then the big cutoff date for folks who work in my world is called the House of Origin cutoff. And that cutoff date is Tuesday, March 9th. And what that means is House bills that originate in the House need to be moved over to the Senate, and Senate bills that originate in the Senate need to have passed out over to the House. Again, there is one ginormous caveat, and that's bills that are necessary to implement the budget. So if you've got 25 bills in a committee that are dead because they didn't make it out of the first policy cutoff, and then a budget comes out 4 days later that represents references all 25 of those bills and are funded in the budget, then that means those bills automatically just had a bunch of life popped into them so that they become back alive. After we get past the House of Origin cutoff on March 9th, we basically just do the same timing cutoffs on the other side. So once a Senate bill goes into the House, there's a fiscal policy cutoff on February 29th. There's an opposite House fiscal cutoff on April Fool's Day, the 1st or the 2nd. And then about April 11th, which is probably about 20 days before the end of the session, is what's called the opposite House final cutoff. So that means, I know this is kind of confusing, that means any Senate bill that was passed over to the House has to either be agreed to by the House or shipped back over to the Senate. And this is where this policy of conference committees, or the process of conference committees, comes about. This is the time, last 20 days of the session, where disputes and again, matters pertaining to the budget get resolved. So that's kind of the long way of saying we're coming up to our first cutoff. And I'll try to on these meetings, and thank you if you can remember, Marco, remind me and we'll tell folks when the next two are coming up, just so that folks have a sense as to where we are in the overall process.
Hey, so a couple questions came in on Facebook before we go back around the table. So our national trustee, Jack Symington, wanted to remind everybody we just chartered a brand new lodge for all liquor cannabis board members in the state of Washington. So if you're listening and you're one of those, thank you and welcome aboard. These are happening every Saturday. And the second part of that is there any bills dealing specifically with liquor cannabis? What I would say is they've wrote the definition of peace officer to include limited commission peace officers like liquor cannabis board in all these bills. So they all pertain to liquor cannabis board at this time, Jack. So,
yeah, the other thing I would add that I'm aware of on the liquor cannabis side is there are several pieces of legislation to either, this wouldn't relate to how those folks go about their job, but I know there are at least a couple, 3 bills relating to license fees and suspending portions of license fees during COVID. So I know there are a couple of bills like that are perking along that relate to the liquor and cannabis board. I'll step out just a little bit, James and Marco. We have a corrections piece of our tracking list. And if you wanted to create a liquor and cannabis board tracking list, we're happy to do that. And we can talk to somebody that represents that lodge. Happy to get on the phone with them. And if there are bills that we want to put on a specific liquor and cannabis board list, happy to do that.
There's also another question related to that. Somebody heard that there's a bill coming that will legalize drugs in Washington, like Oregon's recent law. Do we have any info on that? I've heard that. I haven't seen that bill yet. I will tell you that there are a couple of Southwest Washington legislators that are all over that and don't want that sort of policy coming into Washington state. So I haven't seen it yet, but I will do a double check and make certain that it's not out there.
All right.
Well, thank you, Michael. I appreciate it. And, obviously everyone will go around the room, but do appreciate everyone's support. Obviously, as you can see, the way we've structured this conversation today, it it'll show that we are actively working in the legislature, and it is nonstop, and it will be that way for quite some time. So just know that at least there is a organization like the Fraternal Order Police that looking out for all law enforcement in not only Washington State but throughout this country when these bills are being dropped in the legislature. So thank you.
I'm grinning, Marco, because when you said it's very busy in the legislature, I think that, and it's going to be a long session, I think that's an understatement, but I appreciate your optimism.
All right, Jeff and Leah, you're up.
We don't have really anything to add, except for I just wanted to say I've gotten some messages where people want written updates on all this stuff. And as you can see, we just spent an hour on just a few of the things we're dealing with recently. So I'll be giving written updates probably around the time, the dates that Michael mentioned, probably at the end of those, sometime shortly after those dates, I'll give written updates, but it's just too much to keep up with. That's why we're doing this.
And I'll add to that, Leah, and Marco talked about it, just, again, firefighters like sucking water through a fire hose. Part of the other bad choice of words. Part of what I will tell you is things change so quickly in Olympia, and even more quickly when we're there in person. And I get really concerned about putting stuff out that's in writing, because as soon as it gets to writing and as soon as it gets posted, I got to feel like, something happened, 3 minutes ago. Now I got to change that. And so having these on every Saturday, I know it's a pain, but it really is, I think, kind of the best way. And we'll provide those written updates at those points in time, which I think are good. But I want you all to remember that if you see something in writing, like a tracking list or a report, just remember that is that information at that point in time, because things change quickly in my world.
Yeah, and we'll give the reminder to Michael every time we do this at the at each cutoff date, where we post this information. It will be with the caveat that this is the information we have to this point, and things are always subject to change.
I appreciate that. Mr. Anaya, you're next. Yeah. Not to take the con, James.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, no, I'm good. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome, sir.
So Chris Mondry from Lodge 23 is on here, but he does not have the mic. So we'll go to Kyle Pettit. You got anything to add, sir?
Nope, I don't have anything to add. I just wanted to tune in and just looking to start getting a little more involved and educated on everything that's going on. So I definitely appreciate everything you guys do. I don't think enough of us out here on the line really understand and take into consideration the amount of work you guys are putting in. So I'm just trying to get more people involved and get more involved myself.
Yeah, appreciate it, sir.
Thank you,
Dills,
Kyle.
You're up. Okay, Dills.
You're still up, Dills.
Wake up.
Hey, I'm awake. Hey, I just want to thank everybody again for the hard work they're putting in, and for the people that are watching. Again, same thing as last week. If you're in the squad room and you hear people putting out misinformation, just refer them to the legislative committee if they have questions. I think that it's also important to encourage the younger group of officers that are coming into this profession to be involved as well. That's all I got.
All right, Rob, take us out, buddy.
All right. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. It's incumbent upon you to learn this information because it affects your job, and it's going to affect it long term. So you listen to some of the bills that we've talked about today, and they obviously are going to impact your job right there on the front line, and they could for years to come, especially if you're just getting into the profession. So thank you for tuning in. And next week we'll be back at 10. We'll have the Facebook link, and then shortly after we're done, we're going to share it to the Washington State FOP YouTube channel. So if you're wanting to know what that channel is, it's Washington State FOP, and then it's WAFOP TV. And The Washington State FOP logo is on there, and our last 3 legislative updates are on there. So you can go on there and check that out. And then also, we mentioned at the beginning of the show, but if you are interested, there is a training coming up for officer-involved shootings put on by Washington State and Idaho State FOP attorneys. And that's something that every line officer should probably watch. It's going to be in the evening time. Yeah. And if you're not able to attend that, maybe if you could designate somebody from your squad or something to attend it and bring that information back. Should be really good, about a 2-hour Zoom meeting. So if you've not got
just to interrupt just really quick.
Oh, go ahead.
Just to interrupt, that's also being put on by the Oregon attorneys as well. So it's Oregon, Washington, and Idaho.
Okay, thank you for that, Marco.
Sorry for the
yeah. If you've not gotten that information, your state lodge, or your local lodge president has it, and can get you the link to register. So see you back here at 10 o'clock next week. Thank you, everybody, for your time, and thank you to the panel for taking the time to come on this morning. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.